All right, we're in the end of the first chapter of John, and the transition verse is 34, where it ends with John saying, "That's exactly what I saw happen," talking about the baptism of Jesus. "And I'm telling you, there's no question about it, this is the Son of God." So this is a summary statement of the first part of the first chapter. He said, I shared this with you to tell you this is the Son of God. And now we have the last part of this chapter, and that's what we're going to look at today. It's not preached a lot. You don't hear a lot about it, but it's an excellent set of scriptures that carry some truths for us. So the 35th verse. "The next day John was back at his post with 2 disciples who were watching. He looked up and saw Jesus walking nearby. And he said, 'Here he is, God's Passover lamb.'" Now, John had baptized him the day before. Jesus is back to hear John preach again. In that family, you remember Mary and Elizabeth were cousins. In that family, John's daddy was Zechariah. Zechariah was a priest. He was a country priest of the Israeli people. And everybody just knew John was going to be a preacher. And John, early on, went and lived in the wilderness. We know from the writings that he lived with the Essenes, which was a community, a kind of a wisdom community down by the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea Scrolls came from the Essene community. So John was an Essene. And so he was an ascetic. He was a monk before there were monks. He wore camel hair stuff. He ate wild locusts and honey. And I grew up thinking he ate bugs, but wild locust it's a plant. It's not a bug. Because I thought, man, I ain't never been that hungry. But that John was out there preaching in the wilderness was no surprise to anybody. Now, Jesus was born. Of course, we know the story. I'm not going to redo that. Jesus was born, and Joseph, the world thought Joseph was his father. Joseph was a carpenter, or a stonemason back then, and everybody knew what Jesus was going to do too. He's going to be a stonemason. He's going to work with his dad in the carpenter shop. And you find him at 12 years old being brought back to the carpenter shop when they picked him up at the temple and said, "What are you doing, son? You're supposed to be with us." He said, "It's about my father's business." I said, "Yeah, you are. Come home." So for 18 years, he worked with his dad. The reversal is that these 2 cousins, one, everybody knew that John was going to be the one. So they're looking at John as Elijah. They're looking at John as the Messiah. And that's why they came out and asked him, said, "Are you the Messiah?" He said, "No, I'm not the Messiah." He said, "But there's one coming after me who is the Messiah." And he didn't even know it was going to be Jesus. He didn't know until the dove settled upon Jesus. So now that baptism has occurred. Jesus has been baptized. He's a carpenter's son from Nazareth. And you've got the scripture saying in another place, what good can come out of Nazareth? You know, we know Nazareth. What good can come out of there? So the next day, John's looking up, and he has 2 disciples with him who are watching. He says, here he is, God's Passover lamb. The 2 disciples hear him and went after Jesus. Jesus looked over his shoulder and said to them, "What are you after?" And they said, "Rabbi," which means teacher, "where are you staying?" He replied, "Come along and see for yourself." They came and saw where he was living and ended up staying with him for the day. It was late afternoon when this happened. Jesus was established in Capernaum. He had a house in Capernaum. He worked out of Capernaum. Capernaum is on the map, is here. Nazareth is up over the hill here. Capernaum's on the Sea of Galilee. Right over here is Caesarea, which is the city that Joseph spent most of his life helping build. It was a Roman city built with stone, and that's where he worked. So Jesus lived here. So he had a house, and then one place in the scripture says his house. So if people think about Jesus, he says things like, "I have no place to lay my head." He meant that he was from pillar to post, people chasing him. But he was established. He was 18 years, back then at 12, a grown man, 18 years working with his father. So he took them home. They saw where he was staying. And they came where he was living, and that ended up the day. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, was one of the 2 who heard John's witness and followed Jesus. The first thing he did after finding where Jesus lived was to find his own brother Simon, telling him, "We found the Messiah, the Christ." He immediately led him to Jesus. This is how the church grows. This is how the church strengthens itself. It's word of mouth. It's commitment to commitment. So Andrew went and found his brother Simon. And Jesus took one look at him and said, "You're John's son Simon. From now on, your name is Cephas," or Peter, which means rock. The word Simon means sand. The word Simon means sand. And he said, "Your name's not Simon anymore, it's Cephas." And that meant rock. And this is a name change that Jesus gave him that helps you see what God does in our life. He takes the shifting sand of our life and he makes it solid, puts it into a rock. He makes us able to be who he wants us to be. The next day, it's moving by days, moving kind of quickly. The next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. When he got there, he ran across Philip. Now Galilee, now you're up in Nazareth, in the area of Nazareth. And he said, "Come follow me." Philip's hometown was Bethsaida, and the same as Andrew and Peter. Andrew and Peter were from Bethsaida. On the Sea of Galilee, on the northern rim, you've got Capernaum over here. And if you come back around this way, moving toward Tiberias, you find Bethsaida. It's between Capernaum and Tiberias on the Sea of Galilee. And that was the hometown of Andrew and Peter. And he said, "Come follow me." Philip went, and he found Nathan and told him, "We found the one Moses wrote of in the law, the one preached by the prophets. It's Jesus, Joseph's son, the one from Nazareth." Nathanael said, "Nazareth? You got to be kidding." Philip says, "Come see for yourself." Then Jesus saw him coming and said, "There's a real Israelite, not a false bone in his body." Nathanael said, "Where did you get that idea? You don't know me." Jesus said, "One day, long before Philip called you, I saw you under the fig tree." Nathanael exclaimed, "Rabbi, you're the Son of God, the King of Israel." Jesus said, "You've become a believer simply because I saw you one day sitting under a fig tree. You haven't seen anything yet. Before this is over, you're going to see heaven open and God's angels ascending and descending to the Son of Man." Wow. What kind of witness do you have to give to bring someone to Jesus? Look at this. This is the growing of the church. This is Jesus now is baptized, revealed. How did it pick up people? He said, "Come see." He said, "Come follow me." Jesus said, "Come see where I live." Again, it wasn't belief, it was discipleship. It wasn't believe these three things, it was come see where I live. Come follow me. We've met the Messiah. Come let me show you where he's at. And that's the power of the gospel. And quickly we move away from this toward the part of saying, well, what we've got to do is we've got to teach everybody all the things Jesus taught. Well, that's important. And we need to learn. We need to study. But understand this. Before Peter did anything, before he was able to do anything that showed any potential, he looked at him and he said, "You're called Simon, but I'm going to call you Cephas. You are shifting sand, but I'm going to make you a rock." And of course, you can look ahead with your eyes and see Simon was the one who said, "We're going to do this," and he'd fall back. Simon was the one who says, "Everybody else will deny you, but not me." And there he goes running off into the woods. I mean, he was shifting sand. But Jesus made a prophecy over him and said, "Your name will be called Simon the Rock." And so, as we look at these apostles, that's what I want to take time with today. I want you to understand this is how the church grew. Fred Craddock introduced me to George Morris. George Morris later became the evangelism chairperson, the chair of evangelism at Emory University. And George Morris said, in the first class I took from him, he said, "Let me tell y'all how I came to Christ." He said, "I was raised in a holler up in Appalachia. My daddy worked coal, and said, me and Daddy would sit on the porch after work and said, I worship my daddy, man. My daddy could do no wrong, so I loved him." Said, Mama would get up and go to church, said, but Daddy wouldn't get up and go, so I didn't have to go because I was Daddy's boy. Said, so one day we're sitting on the porch, and the preacher came along, said we knew him, and said, he said, there's going to be a revival, said, want y'all to come. And he said, Mama said, well, we're going to be there. And Daddy said, have you got a mouse in your pocket? He wasn't going to church. So he didn't go. And the revival preacher came by to see him and said, just come one time. Just come one time, and then you don't have to ever come back. And he kind of was amused by that, so he said, well, maybe tonight or tomorrow night I'll come one time. That's back when revivals were 2 weeks long. So a couple nights later, he's back. And they share the gospel about Jesus said, come follow me. And he goes down to the altar and he gives his life to Christ. The whole church knew him, and they just went, their mouths were hanging open. They couldn't believe he's down there. But Mr. Morrison went down and gave his life to Christ. His son didn't go with him that night because he didn't have to go. His daddy told him, you don't have to go, so he was home. He said, I was 15 years old. He said, Daddy came back from church that night. He came in to tell me good night. Said I was there in my bed reading. And he said, son, tomorrow night, we're going to go to church, and you're going to get what I got. And he said, well, what'd you get, Daddy? He said, I don't know, but I got it. He didn't have no words. He couldn't explain it. That next night, George Morris said, we went to revival. Said, we sat there. Said, I heard the sermon. Said, didn't mean much to me. I understood it, but it didn't mean much. He said, and they got to the hymn where it said, now the altar's open. Said, Daddy poked me in the arm. Said, come on, boy. And they went down to the altar. And the preacher came over and said, what can we pray for you? And he said, I looked up and I told him, I said, I don't know, but I want what my daddy got. Now, George Morrison said, that's not a great conversion story. That's not being a storm and the ship saved and you get... He said, I didn't know what I was even asking for, but I loved my daddy. And my daddy said, we're going to go tomorrow night and you're going to get what I got. He couldn't even talk about it. All he knew is when he went down, his heart was strangely warmed, and he was different when he stood up. And George Morrison said, and from that moment forward, we both walked a different way. We get caught up in how to bring someone to Christ. We say, well, I'm not going to tell somebody until I can answer all their questions. There's a wonderful thing to know about answering everybody's question. When somebody asks you a question you can't answer, this is a great answer. That's a good question. That's not the answer. You just admitting that, you can ask me stuff I don't know. That's not hard to do. But God says, if you'll just crack the door, I'll put my hand through it and I'll touch their heart. Jesus said, come see. And then he told him, he said, I saw you days ago sitting under a fig tree. He said, I believe. He said, you believe because I told you I saw you sitting under a fig tree? He said, before this is over, you're going to see the angels ascending and descending to the Son of Man. God reveals his power in the simplest ways, and the more complex we make it, the more disturbed we become. What will God do when we give him our life? I don't know. I don't know exactly what he'll do, but he will make you into who you were created to be. We get so caught up in our society and our life that we forget the language of our world is correct. You and I were procreated. A mother and father created us, but they didn't create us, they procreated us. You were created by God, and you were sent to where the home was that they were asking God for a child, and you were procreated there. And Jesus was sent the same way, miraculously, without union, and Mary was just, she received the zygote, the very cells that are Jesus, and he grew in her womb. Now that's strong. And so Jesus, later in his life, in the 13th chapter of John, you have him saying, and Jesus, knowing he came from God and was going to return to God, took a towel, girded himself, and began to wash the disciples' feet. And he said, I've set an example for you. I've shown you what to do. The main thing that happens when you come to Christ is you know where you came from. You know where you came from. Our society is a little softer in this age than it used to be, but people who didn't know who their daddy was, they were hurting, and people would hurt them. And Charles Allen was preaching one time. He served Grace in Atlanta. He was preaching one time, and this little boy, he came up because he's meeting the people. He's trying to put the families together, and he said, "Now, whose son are you?" And the little boy just shot away. And he turned to the preacher. He says, "What's the matter with him?" He said, "Well, he doesn't know who his daddy is." And Charles walked over to him and took his hand and put it on his face and lifted him up and said, "Well, I recognize you. You're a son of God. God's your father." I don't know if that little boy understood that, but that's the greatest truth ever been told. As fathers, we do our best. We all fall short. But the purpose of being a father is to deliver that child to the Father, who does not only do his best, who is God. In a normal flow of things, my children will outlive me, your children will outlive you, in the normal flow of things. So therefore, we're not going to be there forever for them. So it's very important that we put them in touch with someone who's going to be there forever, someone who will not have to be replaced. And so when you come and give your heart to Christ, he said, he affirms where you came from. He said, "You're here. You're home." See, the good news is not, we've got some qualifying conditions, and if you meet them, you're going to be a part of this thing. Or here's 3 things you got to do to get in. He says, "I created all of you, and if you will come to me, I will in no ways cast you out." There's nobody who can come that God says, "Well, I didn't expect him to come. I haven't made no provisions for him. He's out yonder." Had a little Catholic lady in Albany. She was in the women's Bible study I taught there. And whenever she was asked to pray, she'd close her prayer with this word. She'd say, "And Father, bless the person who's farthest from you today." I never heard that till she said it. But I guess in spatial time, there is a reality that there's somebody every day who's the farthest away. Some close, some distant, but somebody's the farthest away. She prayed for the one farthest away because she knew God was able to bring that person, able to reach that person. So we have the disciples being formed right here. They're being formed out of kinship ties and friendship ties. So he says, "Come see for yourself." We're in COVID times right now, and we're in a surge. And I know you've been praying. Just keep praying, because yesterday we got word that Grady's full. Grady Hospital is our regional hospital, and we're doing the best we can and doing heroically. The doctors and nurses are. But we're in this time when people are frightened and people are afraid, and it's really important that you and I, just because we're scared, we don't become afraid. To be scared is to be human. There's no Navy SEAL that if you sneak up on him and go, that he's not going to flinch. Now, he might kill you right at that moment, but he's going to flinch first, because that scares you. And when you're scared, you need to then be aware that if you stay scared, you become afraid. And that's why Jesus said, "Fear not." He said, "Don't be afraid." Now, you can be scared, but face your fears. Face them. Live them down. Walk through them. There's a time that comes to all men that you measure yourself against the image that God has and the vision he has for you. He doesn't have the same vision for everybody. He doesn't want everybody to be the same. He's not that way. But he does have a vision for you. And whether a life lasts a minute or 100 years, there has never been a life that was not purposeful in this life. It was not given for a purpose and a reason. I've had the privilege and also the agony of being with a couple of people at the hospital who had a child stillborn. And one of the things that they do at the hospital, I'm sure they do at every hospital, they allow that mama to hold that baby. That baby gets to be held because that's the baby. And we don't measure the worth of a child by the potential. You know, when I speak out of my family, when I was born, my mom and daddy loved me. They didn't love me more when I was a year old and more when I was 2 years old. And they loved me when I was born. And that's true of most of us. That love comes and it's given and it's never taken back. It's never removed. Jesus Christ is now walking with Simon and with Andrew and Nathaniel and Philip. And he gathered them because John baptized Jesus. John said something that I'll lift up here too. He said, "The one coming after me is greater than I am." He said, "I'm unworthy to tie his shoes or latch his sandals." He said, "He must increase and I must decrease." This is the truth. And so you have John continuing his ministry. Can you imagine being the one to present Christ, the one to baptize him, and then your ministry just continues out there in the wilderness? You know, you don't get to go on the Oprah show or any of those things. You just keep working, doing what you're doing. So John's disciples, some of them stayed with him, some of them stayed out there in the wilderness. He's still baptizing. And when they arrest John and they bring him in, and Herod had him arrested because he had spoken against Herod. And Herod had enough Jewishness in him that he had some fear of a prophet, and he knew John was a prophet. And so he just had him arrested. But his wife said, to her daughter, said, "Go out there and dance for the king, and he'll grant you a request. And he said, I'll give you your wish. You ask for John's head." And so she did. And Herod said, "That's beautiful." So what do you have? And she said, "I want John's head on a platter." And so he had John beheaded. And at that point, his disciples realized that John's life had been fulfilled. And we would say John's life was cut short by Herod, but it wasn't. Herod just beheaded him. That's all he could do. He couldn't destroy his life. He couldn't destroy his soul. And so that's all he could do. And Jesus makes the point at the end of this chapter, and I'm going to lift this up for you as we kind of look to wrap up this chapter. He's saying, you believe because I can tell you where I saw you another day or something. You believe because I can do that. He could be the same way of saying, you believe because I can turn water into wine, or I've raised Tabitha from the dead, or Lazarus from the dead. That's why you believe. Before this is over, you're going to see heaven open and God's angels descending to the Son of Man and ascending again. America, stop studying the Bible somewhere back yonder. America allowed somebody to be offended with prayer when we took it out of school. And America made a mistake of letting them close our churches. Now, the precautions, the separation, the mask, when I walk from here, I'll have this mask on. Those things we got to do. But we didn't have to close the churches. We could have still met in distances and ways. But you see, society says that's not important. That's just something some people do. This Jesus who John baptized made this statement through St. Paul. Every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus is Lord. It doesn't matter who's ruling the country, running the country, regulating the country. None of that matters. In the time frame of God, which is eternity, none of that matters. He is going to be the one who brings history to its fulfillment. The simple carpenter born in Nazareth, born in Bethlehem, raised in Nazareth. His name is Jesus. John revealed him. And the way we share him is we say to somebody, I know you're having some struggles. We all have struggles. I don't know how he's going to help you, but I know if I take you to Jesus, you're going to be better. Because when I was taken to Jesus, I became better. Not better like quality. I became better like I understood who I was, where I came from, where I was going. The world gets out of the way of a man who knows where he's going. That's just an old saying. That ain't biblical. And the church has always known where she's going. She's going to a place where there's justice and there's peace, where there's righteousness and holiness. And those things are in cheap supply in the world. They just put no stock in them. This is the hammer that comes against us, is a world. But we're not nails, we're anvils. And a hammer will just drive a nail into the wood, but an anvil eventually will break a hammer. And I've said it many times to you. Demolay, when Philip II had him killed, he said, I'm going to have you killed. Anything you want to say? He said, there'll come a day when neither you nor I sit at this tribunal, and another judge will be in place. And then you will find out that our God is an anvil that has worn out many hammers. See, the issue is not you can't kill a Christian. Christians are killed every day. The issue is you just messing with the image out here. Behind this Christian is the anvil. And God's the anvil. So bring people to him. Offer them what Andrew offered to Philip. Jesus changed Simon's name before Simon had done anything that would reveal he was going to be a rock. Simon did not become a rock until after Jesus was crucified, until after he quit running. And we find in the story, Quo Vadis, Simon Peter leaving Rome during the persecution. Paul's in prison. Simon wasn't in prison yet. He's leaving. And Jesus appeared to him on the road. This is tradition, but his life bears it out. And he said, they made the movie, Quo Vadis. It means, where are you going? Jesus appeared to him. Jesus is going back to Rome. Peter's leaving Rome. He said, where are you going? He said, yeah. He said, where are you going, Lord? He said, I am going to die for you again. And Jesus disappeared. And it said Simon's heart was broken. And he turned and went back into Rome. He was arrested. They were looking for him already. They put him in prison. He was with Paul in prison for a short time. But the proof of the pudding, when it got time to kill him, he was a commoner. He wasn't a Roman citizen. They were going to crucify him. And he said to his crucifiers, I'm not worthy to be killed in the way my Lord was killed. Turn my cross upside down. And so they thought that was funny. They nailed him to the cross, turned it upside down, stuck it in the ground head first. It didn't take him long to die. But St. Peter's cross is a cross that's below the cross members. It's not like this, it's like that. Courage comes from knowing that God's with you. Not that you got to make a great speech, that you got to say the right. You just got to say, as for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. And let chips fall where they may. We're in a special time. We're in a time that melts men's hearts. And we need the strength of God that we might be a word of reassurance and a word of wisdom to people who are losing hope. Let us pray. Father, for your love, we thank you that Christ would come, that you would send him, and Lord, that you would remain with us by your precious Spirit. Bless each man here in their homes. Bless those that they see, and may they see in us not arrogance or not confidence, but humility that is assured. May we lead Jesus in this world to other people. Amen. God bless y'all.